Rabbi Hecksher, are you with us? Oh, thank you. Okay, so I just wanted to say Shalom Aleichem to Rabbi Hecksher, and in fact to the Olam who are coming with a Chodesh B'Chodshoi for our Rosh Chodesh year. It's very special to be able to have speakers from far and wide, but particularly special to have, if I may say, a local boy made good. I think that's how we describe Rabbi Avromi. Definitely one of the born and bred in Golders Green, and has made such an impact in his various Habot Torah, not just as the Rav of Eitz Chaim, which has taken the minyan Baruch Hashem and growth, and it's growing and continues to grow because of his wonderful inspirational leadership. He also has one of the most successful ladies' shurim in the area, packed out. Ladies come once a week to hear Rabbi Avromi, and also is a Rosh HaKollel, and runs a kollel of halacha in the B'chona Shul. And besides that, is also the posek for Hatzalah Northwest. So there's a lot on that CV, and much more probably than that. But it does mean that he is somebody who has made an impact in his various Torah activities. We are delighted that we can be able to welcome you here on Zoom, albeit this is a share which is hosted by EAYC, Lilo Nishmas, Yocheved Bas Avrom, Jacqueline Curzon, who is sorely missed, but remembered Midei Chodesh B'Chodshoi through the hard work and efforts of Shlomi Goldmeyer and Daniel Gillis, who ensure that a share takes place each month. And Baruch Hashem, we have a wonderful following, including tonight, of people who want to hear our various and varied guest speakers. So the topic of the share, obviously very Nyone Dioma, Parshas Beshalach, Shabbat Shira, splitting the sea, splitting one's heart. Very elusive from its title, but I guess by the time we finish our share, we'll understand the connection. Thank you so much, Rabbi Hecksher.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Can you see me?
All good. Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Good evening to all. Thank you to David for the warm words of introduction. Let me just zoom in a minute. 1 second. So the story we're going to start with happened, I think it was in 1946, just after the war. A famous story when Rabban Belzer, the Belzer of Zechron Levacha, who had his entire Hasidus decimated and destroyed in the war. He lost his wife and his children as well. And he, part of the She'eris HaPleita, one of the few who survived the war, made his way to Eretz Yisrael. And in the first Shabbos he was, I'm not sure if it was the first Shabbos he was there, or the first Shabbos he did the Tish, at the Tish with Chasidim, was in Parshas Beshalach. And you can imagine, coming from a Chasidus, Belzer Chasidus, which had thousands upon thousands of Chasidim just a few short years before. And now it had been completely decimated and destroyed. And whatever was left was just a me'en, was a little bit compared to what it previously was. Everyone was in such a depressed, sad mood. And there was the Rebbe trying to be mechazik them. Today he was on Parshas Beshalach, and he said the most fundamental, unbelievable words. And he said as follows. We all know the Rashi, at the beginning of the Shira in this week's Parsha, where the Torah Gdosh, the Moshe Rabbeinu starts, Oz Yoshim Moshe Bnei Yisrael Es Hashira Hazos. And Rashi points out that the translation of the word Yoshim means to sing in the future. Then Moshe Rabbeinu and Klal Yisrael will sing. Whereas we would have expected the Torah Gdosh to say, Oz Shor Moshe Bnei Yisrael. Moshe and Klal Yisrael sang the Shira. Why does it say in the Loshim Osid, in the future tense, then Moshe Rabbeinu and Klal Yisrael will sing? So Rashi gives a couple of pshatim, and one of the pshatim he says is, he brings from Chazal and Mikan from here, this is one of the times in the Torah where you see a clear reference to Tchias HaMesim. Why? Because if it was just at that time that Moshe and Klal Yisrael sang, it should have said Oz Shor. But by saying the words Oz Yoshi in the future tense, it means that one day in the future, Moshe Rabbeinu and Klal Yisrael will sing this shira. This shira of Oz Yoshi, which they sang then, they will sing again in the future. Oz Yoshi Moshe Rabbeinu Yisrael. After Baron Belzi says, I don't understand. While it may be true that Tchias HaMesim is one of our Yud Gimel Ikrei Emunah, one of the 13 principles of our faith, which every Yid, man and female, male and female, every person has to cling on to. It's the fiber of our essence. The Yud Gimel Ikrei, the 13 principles of our faith, one of them is Tchias HaMesim. But why Dafka in the Parsha of Oz Yoshi, by Shira Sayam, when Klal Yisrael came out of Mitzrayim and they survived Pius Yamsuf, why does the Torah specifically choose this place to hint to this concept of Tchias HaMesim? Said Baron Belzer, and with this, he was mechazik all the people around him. He gave them strength, and he said as follows. We'll remember what it says at the beginning of the Parsha, that V'chamushkim olu b'nei Yisrael me'etz Mitzrayim. Only 20% of Klal Yisrael was zeicher to come out of Mitzrayim. 80% of them didn't believe enough in the Gula, and they perished in the Makkah of Choshech. So you can imagine that every Yid who came out of Mitzrayim had lost his parents, his spouse, his siblings, his friends, his neighbors, his children perhaps. There wasn't a single person who hadn't lost his nearest and dearest. There was only 20% of one out of every 5 people came out. That was on Makkah's Choshech. We're now holding just a week or so later. They just get up from Shiva. So while it may have been true that they just came out of Mitzrayim and they crossed the Yamsuf, and it was a gewaldige nest, fantastic nest they'd seen. But on the other hand, they were all broken. They all had just lost their families and friends and neighbors. How could it possibly be, asked Baron Belzer? There's someone just getting up from Shiva, not one Shiva, but a Shiva for perhaps all his family, and he can get to the stage of Giloi Shchina, and he can start singing to the Rebbeinu Shem, Oz Yosheh. How is it possible to sing when a person is so down, when a person has gone through such a tremendous personal tragedy? How can a person sing in such a situation? Said Baron Belzer, there's only one answer. Mikan l'tchias HaMesim min HaTorah. Only a Yid can do that. Because a Yid understands, as painful as it is to lose one's nearest and dearest, it's only a short-term separation. But one day, Be'ez Hashem B'Karov, there will be tchias HaMesim. And therefore, since it's only a short separation, therefore, even though it's painful as it is, heartbreaking as it is, but a mamin, a Yid who believes, can still sing Shira. And with that, he turned to the Hasidim around him, who were all one of the 5 who had survived the war. They had all lost their nearest and dearest, their closest families, himself included. And he said, Atas ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim, we can sing Shira, we can continue, we can go forward. But perhaps tonight we can perhaps suggest another answer, another suggestion. Why is it that here the Torah HaKadosha is merames and hints to us this fantastic concept of Tchias HaMesim? We all know that the human being is split into 3 categories. There's what's called the machshava, tibur, and the ma'isa. The thoughts of a person, the speech of a person, and the actions of a person. Person to control his actions is not easy. It's not easy to control yourself from hitting someone when they anger you or kicking someone when they kick you. But part of our obligation in this world is to train ourselves to control ourselves. When we get angry, we shouldn't hit, we shouldn't kick. We should learn to control our actions. However, the Torah HaKadosh doesn't stop there. Torah says not only do you have to control your actions, you have to control your speech. You can't say everything you want. You're not allowed to speak Lashon Hara. But there's something which is even harder than that. That is to control one's machshava. Let me explain what I mean. Out of the Taryag mitzvahs, the 613 mitzvahs which the Torah HaKadosh, which the Rebbeinu Shem commanded us, the vast majority of them are mitzvahs ma'asiyos, things which we have to do, actions. We have to eat the Korban Pesach, we have to eat matzah. We have to go somewhere, we have to do something, we have to shake lulav, we have to sit in the sukkah, we have to be mafresh challah, we have to put on tefillin. All these mitzvahs are mitzvahs which we do with our guf. Not saying it's easy, it's hard. It's hard to get our guf, our ma'asim, completely in line with what the Rebbeinu Shalom wants. But it's doable, it's manageable. However, the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't stop there. The Rebbe says, I want you Yidden to perfect yourself to the extent that you don't only control your maisim, but you control your dibur as well, your speech. You can't say whatever you want. You can't speak. You can't say lashon hara. You can't say yechilus. You're not allowed to embarrass someone in public. You're not allowed to make fun of someone in public. And even things which you're allowed to say, there's times and places where you're not. You're not allowed to speak in shul. You're not allowed to speak when you're davening Shemoneh Esrei, even at home. There's things you're never allowed to say, and even the things you're allowed to say, the situations you're not allowed to say them. So the Rebbe says, I want you to control what you say. And sometimes the Rebbe says you have to say something. For example, as the mitzvah say on say the Nacht of Sipi Yitzias Mitzrayim, you have to talk about the nisim or the miracles of Yitzias Mitzrayim. That's not a mitzvah to do anything. You're sitting in your chair, at the table, you're not doing anything. You're talking. So the Torah Kedosha, besides for instructing us what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do, Torah also instructs us what we're allowed to say and what we're not allowed to say. And that's much harder. It's much harder for a person to control his mouth than to control his actions. However, there's one stage which is even harder than that. The Rebbe wants that we should even control our machshavas, our thoughts. Not only are there things we're not allowed to do and we're not allowed to say, there are even things that we're not allowed to think. A person's not allowed to think about person's not allowed to even think about immorality. He's not allowed to fantasize about immorality, even though he's not doing anything or saying anything. That's not the way he thinks. Not only that, but they think, there's another one. You're not allowed to be jealous. And then the things that you're supposed to think. There's a mitzvah say of Avas Hashem. You're not supposed to do anything. You're supposed to think about loving the Rebbeinu Shalom. You're supposed to think about Yiras Shamayim. So the Torah, in the 613 mitzvahs which the Rebbeinu Shalom gave us, Har Sinai, next week's Parsha, the Torah Kedosha, the Rebbeinu Shalom says that in order for a Yid, in order for a Jew to live a life like the Rebbeinu Shalom wants him to live, or her, it's not just to align our maisim, our deeds, our actions with what Hashem wants, to do things and not to do things. It's not only to say things and not to say things, but it's even to think things and not to think things. And that is so much harder. Our hands and our legs, which represent things which we do, are lower. Then comes our mouth, which is higher, and then comes our brain, which is even higher. Because that's a higher madrega. To control one's actions is hard enough. To control one's speech is even harder. To control one's machshava, one's thought process, to align it with what the Torah Kedosha wants, that's even harder. If you think that's hard enough, it gets harder. It's not only that the Rebbeinu tells us what we're allowed to think, we're not allowed to think. But the Rebbeinu wants us to control even our emotions. An emotion is a natural response to a situation. But nevertheless, the Rebbeinu wants us to learn to control our emotions. And that, not only is it harder than maisim, to do or not to do, not only is it harder than to say or not to say, it's even harder than to think or not to think. It's a feeling. And the Rebbeinu expects us and demands from us to control our feelings and our emotions. The Vilna Gaon says that the hardest mitzvah in the whole Torah, in the entire Torah, out of all 613, is the mitzvah of, when it comes to Sukkot, when the Torah Kedosha says that for 7 days straight, v'hayiso ach someach. It doesn't say you should also be happy, but v'hayiso ach someach. Your one and only emotion has to be simcha. For 7 days straight, irrelevant of your parnasa situation, your financial, your gesund, your health situation, irrelevant of everything that's going on around you and in your house. For 7 days straight, v'hayiso ach someach. The Torah, the Rebbeinu expects us to control our emotions, that for 7 days, whatever's going on around us, we have to be happy and only happy. Ach someach, says the Gaon. That's a hardest mitzvah in Kol HaTorah Kula. Resachmod, which we mentioned before, is another one. It's not a thought, it's an emotion. Don't be jealous. If you see someone who's bought something or has something which you would love to have, you're desperate to have, and you can't begin to understand why they should have it and you can't have it, and the natural emotion is to be jealous, says the Torah, in that says, you're not allowed to be jealous. I want you to control your emotion. Shabbos, when Shabbos comes, it says that a person has to feel the emotion, as if all your work is done. Hashem doesn't want us on Shabbos to be preoccupied and to think. about all the deadlines in our office which we have to meet during the coming week. And therefore the Rebbe says, "Vayichulu hashamayim v'haaretz." Person, when it comes to Shabbos, his emotion has to be as if I've got nothing to do. I've finished all my jobs. There's nothing more. There's no more work waiting for me on Sunday and Monday. These are emotions which our Rebbe wants us to control. And that is something which is extremely hard. Sure, you've all heard of Rabbi Avromi Hecksher on the Rosh Yeshiva in America. One of his Talmidim was going through the tremendous Nisayon, test of infertility. For many years, he didn't have children. And his Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Yitzchak, was mamish holding his hand throughout the entire Nisayon. He went through the ups and the downs with him, mamish like a father. He held on to him. That was his support. Finally, after many, many years, Baruch Hashem, this younger man, his wife became pregnant. And he called out Rabbi Avromi Hecksher, and Rabbi Avromi Hecksher was ecstatic. He was elated, mamish as if his own son had the Yeshua. And he said, don't forget, as soon as the baby's born, of course, don't forget to call me whatever time, day or night. And he says, of course I'll call you. You've been holding my hand throughout this entire Nisayon. Of course I'm going to call you. Late one night, Yeshua finally came, and the baby was born. And with trembling fingers and with tears in his eyes, this boy, this younger man, he calls up his Rosh Yeshiva to share with him the news. And he says, Rosh Yeshiva, Baruch Hashem, the Rebbeinu Shem Yeshua, Baruch Hashem, I had a baby boy. And he was waiting for the tears of coming through the phone on the other side, the elation. And Rabbi Avromi says, wow, that's such wonderful news, Mazel Tov. And he put the phone down. This younger man couldn't believe it. What's he done wrong? He must have done something wrong to upset the Rosh Yeshiva. He's been holding his hand throughout this entire Nisayon. He was waiting for the news just like he was. And his response was so cold. It was so matter of fact. And this younger man, his elation turned into despair. What have I done to hurt my Rosh Yeshiva's feelings? About 3/4 of an hour later, his phone rings and he picks up. And it's Rosh Yeshiva on the other end. And with elation in his voice and tears in his eyes, he wishes him such a heartig and mazel tov on the simcha that his wife had a baby, and he gives him brachas mamish with the ganze warmkeit, with the whole warmth of his heart. And he says, Rosh Yeshiva, I don't understand. When I called you with the news 3/4 of an hour ago, you sounded so matter of fact, you sounded so cold. It's almost as if it didn't interest you. And suddenly 3/4 of an hour later, you call me back with such an elation in your voice. What happened, mate? What happened 3/4 of an hour ago? What happened now? Why were you not elated then? And suddenly 3/4 of an hour, suddenly the penny dropped. What happened? And the Rosh Yeshiva said, when you called me 3/4 of an hour ago, I was ecstatic, as if my own child had the Yeshua. And my heart was bursting with simcha for you. But there was a problem. Just then I had someone in my office who's going through the same Nisayon. He's also going through this Nisayon of infertility. He doesn't yet have the Yeshua. His wife is not yet pregnant. And I thought that perhaps if I would respond with such an elation and so ecstatic, perhaps that would be another dagger in his heart. Perhaps that would rub more salt in the wound. And therefore I had to control myself. However high I was, however ecstatic I was, I had to control myself. Now he's left the room. Now I can let my emotions spill forth. That's a God will be soul. Someone who can control his emotions to the extent that his heart was bursting with joy. But if it's going to come on the cheshbon of another person, it's going to rub salt in his wounds, I've got to control my emotions. I can't show it. I'll wait till he leaves the room in 3/4 an hour and then I'll show it. That's what the Torah Kedoshim, that's what the Rebbeinu Shem demands from us. Not just to control our actions, not only to control our speech, but even to control our thoughts and even to control our emotions. However, that's still not it. There's one more thing which the Rebbeinu Shem demands from us, expects from us, which is perhaps the Madrig of Malachim. This is what it says. What happens when a person has two conflicting emotions at the very same time? There are times of joy and there are times of sadness. But what happens if they meet at the same time? And at the very same time, a person has a reason why to be ecstatic, and a person also has a reason to be terribly, terribly upset. What then? What are we supposed to do with our emotions then? Is it possible, is it humanly possible for these two emotions to coexist in my heart and in my brain at the very same time? You'll remember the beginning of the third parak of Koheles, Shlomo HaMelech goes through the 28 different ace. There's a time for this, there's a time for that, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to reap, a time to harvest, a time to sow, a time to throw stones, a time to gather in stones. Ace loledes, ace lomos. There's always a lamed at the beginning, and there's one exception. It says ace stefoid, the ace rekoid. There's a time to eulogize, there's a time to dance. And all of the first asked, what happened to the lameds then? Why doesn't it say ace lispoid, ace lirikoid? Why did Shlomo HaMelech drop the lameds? And I still want a fabulous pshat. I don't remember where it comes from. All the others don't coexist at the same time. For example, Eis Milchama Eis Sholem. Either it's a time of Milchama, it's a time of Sholem. Either it's a time of throwing stones, it's a time of gathering stones. Either it's a time of sowing or it's a time of reaping. You don't sow and reap at the same time. It's different seasons in the year. So each one is unique. Eis Lintoya, there's a time to plant and there's a time to reap. When it comes to Spoid and Akoid, eulogizing and dancing, being sad and being happy, they may not be at separate times. They may have to coexist at the same time. That at the very same time, two things are going on in your life. Which one of them inspires dancing, happiness, elation, ecstasy, and the other one perhaps inspires upset, sadness, depression. What happens eulogizing? What happens when these two things meet at the same time? Says Shlomo HaMelech, not only does the Rebbeinu expect us and want us to control our Maisa, our Dibba, our Machshava, and our emotions, Hashem even wants our heart should be big enough to have two conflicting emotions at the very same time. We all know stories about how there can be a tragedy. A tragedy, I remember in Eretz 20 years ago, a terrible, terrible tragedy when a little 3-year-old boy, nothing seemed wrong with him, just had a little cough. Before we knew it, was his levaya. One thing went, and the entire kid was shaken. No one knew what hit them. And that very night, someone was making chasna. And yet we had to pick up from the shiva, from the levaya, and go to the chasna and dance. How is that possible? That's what the Rebbeinu expects from us. That sometimes there can be two things at the same time, and a person's heart has to be big enough to have the svoid and the code at the same time. Let me tell you a Moedik Maisa, fantastic Maisa, and then you'll understand the headline of the title of the shir. There was someone who wanted to go and ask a question to Moshe Feinstein. And he was waiting outside in the queue, and finally he was the front of the queue. There was only one person in front of him who was in Moshe's room. But the person who went in didn't close the door completely. So the fellow outside, who was next in queue, heard the discussion between Moshe and the person who was with him. And this person poured out his tzaros to Rav Moshe. He poured out his tzaros one tzar after another tzar, as if he was the Rebbeinu punching bag, Kaviyachol. Person whose entire life was full, one chapter after another chapter of tzaros. The person outside said, even I didn't know him, I started crying. How one person can have so many tzaros. And he's picturing what's going on inside between Rav Moshe and this person. This person's asking Rav Moshe for chizuk. Eventually he comes out the room, and it's the next friend, it's his turn, and he walks in. When he walks in, Moshe greets him with a smile from ear to ear, Shalom Aleichem, what's your name, etc. And he said, Rebbe, I've got to ask you a question. Before I get to the question I want to discuss. I was outside, I just heard that discussion between you and the previous shoyim, the previous person who was in him. I started crying. I'm Tzivachim from his tzaros. You must know him, he poured out your tzaros to him. How can you greet me with such a smile? How do you do that? So the Moshe first he said, it's not to say that you're listening to our conversation, even if the door's open. But secondly, he said, well, now that you've already asked the question, he said, I sit every day listening to people's tzaros. If I take them all to heart, there's no way I could function as a human being. There's no way I'd be able to learn. There's no way I'd be able to smile to my spouse, to my children. I wouldn't be able to cope if I take it all to heart. And how can I not take it to heart? A Yid has got tzar, how can I not be mishtatef b'tzarei? Says the Moshe, I've trained myself to split my heart into two. That there's one half of my heart which absorbs all the emotions, all the tzaros which people tell me, and it attacks my heart, and I absorb everything, and it pains me. The other half of my heart is happy. It's untouchable. And with that half of my heart, I greet people, I greet my friends, I greet whoever comes into my room, I greet my spouse, I greet my children. I learn with it. I've trained myself to split my heart into two. That's what I mean to split the heart. That darga, which is perhaps the darga of a malach, the etzem, that's what the Rebbeinu expects from all of us. that our heart should be big enough to be able to control two conflicting emotions at the same time. I remember one of my chaverim told me, a roommate of his, Siddish younger man, he told me when they were bochum in yeshiva Katana, and a roommate of his became sick, and Erev Sukkos Nebuch, this young bocher was nifter. And all the bochrim were completely tzuruded, completely shattered, and understandably so. And they went to the Rebbe, the Hasidic Rebbe, and they asked him, "It's Sukkot tonight. What are we supposed to do?" Sukkot is a time where Yisrach Sameach. And the Rebbe gave, I don't remember the exact words, but the Rebbe gave him this same idea, the same concept. You're supposed to mourn for your friend, and you're supposed to be happy for Sukkot. Two things have to coexist. It's almost humanly, I would say it's impossible. If the Rebbe demands and expects it from us, then obviously it's impossible. The Rebbe created us, and he knows what we're capable of. Let me bring you one more proof from next week's Parsha. It says at the beginning of next week's Parsha that when Yisroi, the father-in-law of Moshe, heard everything that had happened, the whole story of the 10 Makkos and Kriyas Yamsuf, says the pasuk Vayichad Yisroi al Kol HaTorah. So Rashi brings two translations to the word Vayichad Yisroi. The first translation, Vayichad Yisroi, is Lashon Chedva, Gilo Ino Ditza V'Chedva, happiness. It says Rashi Vayichad Yisroi Vayismach Yisroi. He was elated, he was ecstatic, he was happy that Klal Yisrael had a salvation in Yeshua from Mitzrayim. The second shot says Rashi, Vayichad means Nasa B'Soi Chidudin. He got goose pimples, Meitzah, he was terribly upset. Al Ibud Mitzrayim, that the Mitzrayim, the Egyptians perished. He was again. Previously, he was a non-Jewish person, he was the guy. He felt for the guy. Now, it's not uncommon for Rashi to give two different pshatim on a word in the Torah. But here we've got one word in the Torah where the two pshatim, the two explanations, are so opposite. It can't be one translation, Vayichad, he was happy. Yisro was happy that the Yidden had a salvation. The other translation, Vayichad, Yisro was distraught that the Mitzrayim perished. How can the same word, Vayichad, mean he was ecstatic and he was distraught? How do those two pshatim? The answer is like we're saying. That Yisro's heart was split into two. He was ecstatic, he was elated for the Yidden, and he was distraught about the Mitzrayim's demise. That is be'etzem what the Rebbeinu Shem wants from us. The Rebbeinu Shem wants us to be able to control ourselves. That in the same way that he split the sea, we can split our hearts. And split our heart, on the one hand, appreciate and thank for all the tovas that the Rebbeinu Shem does for us. And on the other hand, be upset when there's a tzara going on. Moshe Rabbeinu had two sons. He called them Gershom and Eliezer. What does Gershom mean? Gershom means Ger Hoisi. I'm not in my hometown, I'm in exile. That was a name which reminded Moshe of the tzaras that he's in. And the second one he called Eliezer, Ki Elekeavi Be'ezri, the Rebbeinu saved me from the sword of power. That was the simcha in Moshe Rabbeinu's life. Moshe Rabbeinu said, I've got two children, two names, and the whole time he's calling Gershom and Eliezer and Gershom. A person has to have the two conflicting emotions, or sometimes you're going to need to have two conflicting emotions at the same time. Klal Yisrael is going through a time when perhaps we've got very conflicting emotions. On the one hand, we see such awesome, tremendous nisim. But certainly over the last 15 months or so, the nisim that the Rebbeinu has done for Klal Yisrael all over the world, but especially Eretz Yisrael, is just mind-boggling. The clarity with which we can see the nisim and the Yeshua and the Hashgacha Pratis is mind-boggling. And a person, the Yid, has to be full of simcha about every Yeshua that comes from Klal Yisrael, every terrorist attack that's thwarted, it's awesome what's going on. We've got hostages who are released, whose heart isn't pumping with simcha, who isn't elated. But at the same time, there's Rahman on so many tzaras, there's people still in captivity. There's people still with their personal tzaras. Rahman we've still got enemies from all four sides who want to destroy us. We've got to be very wary, we've got to be very careful, we've got to be very scared. And yet, that's how our avoid. Vayichad Yisrael, our heart has to be big enough and large enough that neither emotion should dull the other and should erase the other. That we're ecstatic and we sing Shira and we sing Nishmat of all the chasadim the Rebbeinu Shem does for us. And at the same time, we mispanel, we cry and we daven and we pray. And bechiyas with tears that the Rebbeinu Shem should send a Yeshua for the rest of Klal Yisrael. And the same might be on a person's private life. There are things in his life which are tremendous and fantastic, and he sees the hashgach and he sees the Yeshua. On the other hand, the things, either in his own life or in his nearest and dearest, his siblings, his friends, his neighbors, who they're desperate for Yeshua, be in shidduchim, be in parnasa, be in gesund, whatever it is. And a person's heart has to be large enough, like with Moshe, to split it, to be ecstatic, to be elated, and to be tearful at the same time. Let's go back to where we started. We had a kasha. How could it possibly, the Belzdorf's kasha, how could it possibly be that Yidden just getting up from Shiva, 80% of Klal Yisrael had been destroyed, and yet they can sing Shira? How is that possible? How is it possible to sing Shira when Klal Yisrael had just been decimated? 80% of them had been wiped out. So the Belzdorf, like we said before, said his text of Mikana Tchias Amesim in Torah. But perhaps according to what we're saying, there's a different text. That's what the Rebbeinu Shem wants from us. That our heart should be large enough and big enough. So on the one hand, sing Shira, the Rebbeinu Shem just did this awesome, once in a lifetime nest of Kriyas Yamsuf, where the Rebbeinu Shem showed the entire world, Shomu Ami Migozim, the entire world was witness and was gobsmacked about how the Rebbeinu Shem showed his love for Klal Yisrael. So yes, we've got to sing Shira. At the same time, it doesn't dull the pain in our hearts. We've just lost 80% of Klal Yisrael. They're all a Yochid. They're all a Yochid Me'ev, Shnayim Mishvacha. They've all lost their nearest and dearest, their closest. Doesn't matter. Those two emotions have to coexist B'Shalom. Yehi Ratzon, let it be the Rebbeinu Shem as well. But Be'ez Hashem, the time should come B'Koiv, where we can get to Oz Yimolei Schok Pinu, where our mouths will be full of Simcha. There won't be two conflicting emotions, both Simcha and tears, tefillas at the same time. But rather, Oz Yimolei Schok Pinu. Our mouths should be full of Simcha. We won't have to split our heart anymore. Our mouth, we'll see Moshiach, we'll see the Hashgacha. There will be no tzaros in Klal Yisrael. There'll only be our Tov Ha'ametiv. There won't be dynamis. That's Be'ez Hashem what we aspire to. That's what we hope for. But in order to get there, what we have to do is, on the one hand, be mispalel for the tzaros in Klal Yisrael b'chlal b'frat, and at the same time, make sure to stress as well the elation, the ecstasy that we have from every Yeshua which Klal Yisrael has b'chlal b'frat. Yiratzon Be'ez Hashem. Together we should be zeicher to the day to dance together towards Mashiach Tekenu. Oz Yimolei Schok Pinu. Our mouths will be full of laughter, full of simcha, full of ecstasy. B'meher of Yameinu, Amen v'Amen. Have a very good evening.
Wow, thank you so much. We now quite understand why the Shurim was so packed and why you're so popular. It was something very, very special. Can I first of all just say that those who want to keep up to the Shurim, on the chat, you will find a WhatsApp group that will only disturb you with the Shurim, nothing else. Nobody will be selling anything to you. But I also want to say to you that we've had the chat come through to me of various people who have given masholim and examples in their own life and friends' life that they've seen people have the mixed emotions. I just want to finish off with something on your genre, Rabbi Hecksher, and that is with Jacqueline herself. Jacqueline Curzon, who was through the last months of her life was extremely, extremely ill with cancer, extremely ill, and unfortunately that she died from that machla. I was able to see her on Purim, and she was so happy. She even dressed up as a doctor and gave herself the simcha, although she was so ill, and she was able to actually synthesize those two emotions, being so ill at the same time, knew it was Purim and wanted to be Leibedik and had simcha for that. So it couldn't be more appropriate, your theme tonight, that has given us another inspiration and reminded us of Jacqueline Curzon, Alei Shalom, of how she was somebody who was able to bring those two emotions together. Bez Hashem, we should be zocher to fulfill the message of the shir tonight, and we should be able to have not, if I may say, not just as you said at the end, not just to have the mixed emotions, Bez Hashem, it should be 100% of one emotion, as you said, as you want to say, Pinu, and at the same time realizing when we are challenging that those challenges that come, that we can cope with them, knowing that we have the mixed emotion as well. Shkoyach, thank you so much, and good chodesh, belated chodesh to you and everybody on the shir. Thank you.